Hey friends, welcome back to First Church of God. Thanks for joining us again today. Hey, do you remember the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears? It's that fairy tale from way back that we were taught over the years. I find it kind of interesting. So let me refresh your memories of this story for just a little bit. Remember Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear, they went out for the day. They cooked breakfast, but it was too hot, and they were just kind of letting it chill out so that it would be okay for them. And they left the house. Now, here's the mistake. They should have a Ring doorbell or lock the door or something, because along the way comes this little girl by the name of Goldilocks, and she goes into their house. Yes, she was trespassing. She went in where she wasn't supposed to, where she was not invited to. And she saw the food on the table. What'd she do? She began to eat it. She began to taste each bowl. And again, we remember she's doing this without permission of the owners. The largest bowl, which we assume is Papa Bear's bowl, she tastes it, and it is that's right, it's too hot. Then she goes to Mama Bear's, and she tries it, and it's too cold. But when she got to Baby Bear's, she tasted it, and it was just right, exactly. She goes into the living room, and she tries the different chairs in the living room, and there's Papa Bear's chair, and it's too hard, and Mama Bear's too soft, and Baby Bear's was just right. And then what happens? Baby Bear's chair breaks. The terrible teen of terror then goes into another part of the house. She's trespassed. She's broken property. She's stolen. Well, she ate the food, stolen it, whatever you want to call it. Then she goes into the bedroom and she tries out the different beds. One person says she was jumping on the beds. I don't know. I wasn't there. But the first bed was Papa Bear's, and it was too hard. And Mama Bear's was too soft, and Baby Bear's was just right. And what she do? She falls asleep. Well, the terrible teenager of terror is asleep, and she since she couldn't find any comfort on the other two beds, she goes to this one. And when the bears return, they find the damage, they find the food's gone, and they find the darling laying in the bed. When she is awakened, she's terrified. She flees from the house. End of the story. Now, I found it interesting in a little research on that book. I thought, okay, Grimm's fairy tale, they would have said that the young woman was eaten by the bears. That's what I would think. But come to find out, no, it's a different ending than what I expected. I was very surprised, because when she runs out of the house, Baby Bear is seen in the doorway yelling out, "Don't run away, come back. I forgive you. Come play with me." And the story goes on that Baby Bear and Goldilocks would get together after that, and they would play together. And sometimes Baby Bear would go to her house. Sometimes she would come to Goldilocks' house. Kind of a strange story. But think about it. What is the moral of the story, Goldilocks and the Three Bears? Well, the moral is that Goldilocks was a self-centered individual. Self-centeredness leads to disrespect of others' privacy and property. I believe that we also see here that she was never concerned with who she would end up hurting. Now, when I think about Goldilocks, it makes me think of something God was speaking to me about recently. He said, many want the favor of God only if they can have their flavor of God. Many want the favor of God if they can have their own flavor of God. Friends, understand this. You cannot have the favor of God while trying to create your own flavor of God, because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He does not change. So I decided that today's message would be titled Favor, Not Flavor. As God allows, I would like to make this into a series, and the series I'd like to call it Prodigal Reflections, or Pondering. Prodigal pondering. A flavor of God is when we try to make God work within our own standards rather than to bring our life into his standards. God is not Burger King where we have it our way. While Jesus is on earth, he always spoke in parables. A parable is a simple story to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. Some of the parables have multiple interpretations. Often in Jesus' parables, there's one person that represents God and one person that represents us, or maybe even somebody else in our lives. One of my favorite parables is found in Luke chapter 15, starting at verse 11. Listen with me. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of the country, who sent him to the field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. He longed to eat them. He didn't eat them. He longed to eat them. He was still hungry. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servant, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he is found.' So they began to celebrate." Some observations. First of all, observe that the son desired a favor from the father because he didn't like the flavor of his father. When the Pharisees and the teachers of the law heard this parable, when they heard Jesus teach this, their jaws were dropping on the ground, because no Jewish father would have allowed his son to do what this Jewish father had allowed him to do. Especially when at that part when the father runs to him, no Jewish father would have ever ran to his son in this way. And when the son said, "I want my share," he was saying, "I want you dead, Dad." That's how you get an inheritance. Somebody has to die, right? So I'd like the flavor. I don't like the flavor around here, so I want you dead. So my observations, first of all, Jewish law required that the oldest child would have gotten 2/3 of the inheritance, while the younger or any other siblings would have had to divide up 1/3. And observe this too. When the son went away, we read nothing of the father chasing after him, begging him to stay, or even going and checking on him. But notice again here, verse 17, which is one of my favorite verses in this passage. When he came to his senses, think about it. When he came to his senses, this is what I think he was saying. He says, the flavor at my father's is better than the flavor where I am. I have no favor with this flavor. Maybe as a servant, it won't be as bad as it is right here. When you land flat on your back, the only thing you can do is look up. And I believe that the son didn't like the flavor of his father because he didn't know his father. It's hard to know how much your dad loves you until you need his help or his assistance. Let me ask you, have you ever been to a circus? Have you ever watched the trapeze artist at a circus? And what's interesting is when the circus is going on, there's only one ring with the trapeze artist in it. Only one. Not 3, but only one. Because they want your attention on them. They swing back and forth with the greatest of ease. And they fly from one point to the other point in midair. I've never observed a trapeze act that did not have a safety net. Even when they're just beginning, when they're just learning how to do this, they are safely harnessed to something so they don't fall to the ground and get hurt, so that when they impact the net, it won't be as painful. These artists don't appear to need the net, but I'm sure that they are thankful that it's there. Before they even climb to the top where they take off from, they check the safety. They check to make sure that that safety net is secure, that it's not raveled, that it doesn't have holes in it, that it's ready to catch them if they were to need it. Their plan is to only use that net to get down. But just in case they need it, they are thankful that it's there. God is showing me that as a parent, or even as when I become a grandparent someday, and I'm not in a hurry for that, okay? But someday I may be a grandparent. But as a parent, I am the safety net to my children. I am ready to catch them when they need to be caught. But also, it is their responsibility, just like the trapeze artist's responsibility, to check the rigging of the net. It's a two-way street. The son didn't really know the heart or the love of the father until he came to his senses. The rest of verse 17 says, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving." The more we come to know the Father, the more we come to know ourselves. Listen close. The more intimately you know God the Father, the more you will love him. And the more you love him, the more you will follow him. And the more you follow him, the more you become like him. And the more you become like him, the more you get to know what you were created to be. Knowing more about him isn't knowing him. And just before Christmas, there was a lot of talk about this Bethlehem star that was going to appear. Some stars and planets were aligning and stuff. And I had a few people asking me questions. And I said, you know what? You're looking at the wrong thing. You need to be looking to know God, not know about God. And he warns us in Matthew about worrying about signs and wonders. The true thing that we need is an intimate relationship with the Father. We need to be more concerned about knowing God and less about knowing about God. It doesn't matter if you can answer all the questions of trivia. It matters, do you know him? Do you know him intimately? Because if we are not careful, we can be looking for love in all of the wrong places and get caught up in something that pulls us away from God rather than something that pulls us towards God. Also, I want you to see something here. The Father never compared the sons. Well, you know, your brother always did this. Your brother always did that. Father never compared the sons. And God, our Father, never compares what he created. The flavor of God doesn't change to suit you. You don't have the authority to declare what is right and what is wrong so that you can do in your life whatever you want to do. God is the standard, and there is no other standard. And that's why Jesus could say in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, he says, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. And many enter through it. Many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few will find it." When the prodigal son returned, he had to leave his old ways. He could not bring what he was doing in the far country back home with him. And he couldn't go running back to the far country. He had to fall under the authority of his father. The son had to experience, for the son to experience the favor of God, he had to walk within the flavor of the Father that was established. The favor of God is not a substitute for prayer, is not a substitute for praying like it depends on God and working like it depends on you. The favor of God is not a good luck charm. It's not a token because you've been good. If you want the favor of God, you've got to walk in obedience to God. And the difference between think about this, the difference between the words creative and the word reactive is where you place the letter C. It's a matter of how you see things. It's a matter of perspective. Often we get the wrong flavor of God because we have the wrong perspective of God. When I start thinking about this prodigal son, I wonder, what was his thoughts? While he was sitting there feeding the pigs and longing to eat the pods that he was feeding them, I wonder what was going through his mind. Why did he even think that his father would take him back as a servant? What was it that gave him hope that his father would say, "Hey, come and be a servant"? and not just keep on walking. I believe it was the reputation of the father. He remembered the actions the father had taken in different circumstances of the past. And because of the faithfulness the son had seen in his father while growing up, he had hope in the future. He refreshed his perspective. So what can we do with this information? What can you or I do with what I've talked about so far? I think the first thing that each and every one of us has to establish in our life individually is, who is God to me? Do I see this entire God relationship as just something I can float through life with? Or is it more than that? I'm reminded in 2 Samuel, David is addressing God, and he calls God Adonai. He's saying sovereign Lord and master. David was in a position of authority and power, and yet he was able to see himself as a servant of God rather than somebody that is above God or above God's standards. So I want to challenge you here to get alone for a little while this week. Find a place where there is no one else around. Leave your cell phone in the other room. Then ask, who is God to me? What is the flavor of God I'm trying to create? Because if you are trying to create a flavor, you will never be satisfied. But if you begin to say, I see you as Adonai, I see you as sovereign and master Lord of my life, and I will do things your way and not my way. This is where you find freedom. And this is where you find favor of God, which I'd rather have the favor of God than not have the favor of God. The not having the favor of God is not rejection, because God, the love of God does not stop. It continues towards us. And don't be mistaken, because sometimes what feels like God's rejection is actually God's protection. But other times, it's God's wake-up call. And while you sit with God, while you're quiet with him, and you begin to start saying, okay, God, what's going on with us? If you're brave enough to ask, he is willing to reveal to you who he really is. You might even find yourself sitting in a pigsty. And when you come to your senses, he's willing to take you in, wrap his arms around you, and say, welcome home, my child. That's who he is. He is a loving father. But he also has his standards, and he wants us to walk within those standards. Hey, this is Pastor Kevin. Thanks for joining us today, and I can't wait to see you. Our doors are open to you. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you don't want to wear a mask, that's okay. We just love to have the fellowship. And for those of you that continue to support this church with your giving, thank you so much, because God loves a cheerful and generous giver. Blessings to you.